what you want to be thinking of when you're thinking about what to plant and you know that you're maybe not getting in the ground now, but you have to wait a little bit, is you want to think about what things are going to mature in the time that you have left in the warmer temperatures. Because basically, if you start to plant sometime in June, your minimum temperatures, your low temperatures are probably in the 60s and your hotter temperatures are in the 80s. So
Most
you
people
want to
walk into June feeling like they already lost. They told themselves they would start in March. Then April passed. Then May. And now the pots on the balcony are still empty. And that quiet voice in the back of the mind says the same thing it always says. Wait until next year. That voice is wrong. June is not the end of the growing window. For container gardeners, June is where the real season begins. The soil is already warm. The sun stays longer. And the right crops planted now don't just survive. They explode. But most people never discover that. They assume containers are a compromise, a backup plan for people without real garden space. So they think small, start small, and get exactly the small results they expected. What they never see coming is what a container can actually do. The right vegetables, planted before June runs out, don't grow quietly. They climb. They multiply. They produce so heavily that one pot stops feeling like a hobby and starts feeling like a food source. Some crops on this list are ready in under a month. Others feed from the same plant all summer long. And one of them delivers two completely separate harvests from a single container. This is not about having more space. Every crop on this list has been grown on balconies, patios, and small porches. In ordinary pots. The kind sitting empty right now outside someone's door. The difference between harvesting all summer and waiting until next year is not land. It is knowing which crops to plant and planting them before the window closes. Hi viewers, do you currently have empty pots or containers at home that you have not planted yet? Drop a yes or no in the comments right now. Because number 6 on this list is the crop that makes people stop and stare at their containers and realize they have been thinking about this all wrong. And number 1 delivers two completely different foods from the same pot. One above the ground. One hidden beneath it. 15 crops. One season. The countdown starts now. Number 15. Radish. Most people dismiss radishes. They see them as a garnish. Something sliced thin and placed on the side of a plate. Not a real crop. Not something worth dedicating container space to. That thinking is expensive. Because radishes are ready in under 30 days. Plant them before June ends and a harvest arrives before most gardeners have even seen their first tomato flower. One container can run through several full cycles in a single season. That is not one harvest. That is 3, 4, sometimes more. And almost nobody talks about what grows above the soil. The greens are edible. Young radish leaves go into salads, stir-fries, and soups. So one planting produces food underground and food above ground at the same time. That doubles the value of a single pot without adding a single extra seed. Radishes also perform in the cooler edges of the season. Early June mornings. Late summer evenings when the heat softens. They do not need peak conditions. They just need someone willing to plant them. For beginners, radishes teach something no gardening book can fully explain. The feeling of pulling food from a pot that was empty 2 weeks ago. That feeling changes people. Number 14. Green onion. Green onions grow up, not out. That matters more than most people realize. A container filled with green onions uses vertical space efficiently. Dozens of plants fit where other crops would demand room to spread. But the real advantage is not how they grow. It is what happens after the first harvest. Cut the tops. Leave the roots. Watch them come back. That single behavior turns one pot into a renewable food source. Not one harvest and done. A continuous supply from the same planting week after week, for months. Some growers never even buy seeds. They regrow store-bought green onions in containers and never stop harvesting from that same bunch. They go into everything. Eggs in the morning. Soups at night. Rice dishes, noodles, sauces. Green onions are one of those ingredients that disappear from the kitchen constantly, which makes a pot that keeps producing them feel almost unreasonably useful. And if radishes and green onions sound simple, good. Because what comes next is where most people start getting surprised.
If you're struggling to figure out which plants you want to grow in your containers this summer, here's some of my top favorites. Greens, you can do tropical spinaches like Okinawa, Shiso, Longevity, Red Mouth.
Number 13. Lettuce. Here is where most container gardeners leave money on the table. They grow lettuce, wait for a full head to form, cut the whole thing, and start over from scratch. That approach works, but it wastes weeks of potential that the plant is quietly offering. The smarter method is cutting only the outer leaves. Leave the center untouched. The plant responds by producing more. That single shift transforms one container of lettuce from a single meal into weeks of continuous harvest from the same soil. Several plants packed into one wide container multiply that effect. A balcony with 2 or 3 lettuce pots, managed this way, can supply fresh salad greens for most of the summer without replanting. Fresh lettuce also tastes different than anything from a store. The gap in flavor is immediate and obvious. Once someone tastes the difference, the idea of buying plastic-wrapped lettuce that traveled hundreds of miles feels unnecessary. June planting works especially well because containers move. Full sun in spring. Partial shade when summer heat peaks. That flexibility protects the plant through temperature swings that would destroy a fixed garden bed. Number 12. Beet. Beets in containers almost feel like cheating. In hard garden soil, beet roots twist around rocks, hit clay, and come out misshapen. In a pot filled with loose potting mix, they have nothing in their way. The roots develop evenly the way they were supposed to, and the harvest reflects it. But the real reason beets belong on this list is the double harvest. Most people plant beets for the root. They wait, harvest the bulb, and consider the job done. What they miss is that beet greens are edible from the very beginning. While the root is still forming underground, the leaves above are already ready to eat. Sautéed, added to soups used like spinach. One pot, 2 completely different food sources. At the same time, beet roots also store well after harvest. That means a single container planting produces food for immediate use and food that lasts for weeks in storage. That combination of fresh harvest and stored food from one pot is something most people only discover once. And if beets already offer 2 harvests from one plant, what comes at number 6 does something even more dramatic underground. Number 11. Bush bean. Bush beans look modest. Compact plants. No climbing required. No tall trellis system taking over a small balcony. But that modesty is hiding something. Keep harvesting and they keep producing. That is the behavior that makes bush beans exceptional in containers. The plant does not wind down after a few pods appear. It responds to harvesting by making more. Consistent picking over several weeks can generate a yield that surprises even experienced growers. They also add something to the soil that most vegetables take away. Nitrogen. Bush beans fix nitrogen into the potting mix as they grow, which improves conditions for whatever gets planted in that same container next. That means the pot itself becomes more productive over time. And nutritionally, beans carry real weight. Protein, fiber, substance. Not just greens or garnishes, but food that fills a plate and satisfies a meal. One row of pots filled with bush beans, planted before June ends, can quietly change the way a small space feels. Not decorative, not experimental, productive. And starting at number 10, this list moves into a different category entirely. These are not fast crops or convenience crops. These are long-haul producers. And number 9 is the one most people never think to put in a container at all. Number 10. Kale. One plant. Months of harvest. That is the kale equation in containers. Most vegetables get planted, produce, and get pulled. Kale does not follow that pattern. Harvest the outer leaves, leave the center growing, and the plant responds by pushing out more. That cycle can continue for the entire season. One pot of kale planted in June can still be feeding someone in October. For a balcony or small patio, that kind of staying power is rare. Kale also grows upward. Tall, structured, efficient. It does not spread across valuable surface space. It reaches up, which means other containers can sit beside it without being crowded out. And then there is the cold weather behavior that catches most people off guard. When temperatures drop in late summer and early fall, kale does not fade. It sweetens. Frost changes the chemistry of the leaves and improves the flavor in a way that warm weather kale simply cannot match. While other crops are shutting down, kale is quietly getting better. Nutritionally, it is difficult to compete with. Vitamins, minerals, fiber, density. A container of kale is not a side project. It is one of the most valuable food-producing pots in the entire system. Number 9. Swiss chard. Swiss chard is the crop that does the kale job in summer heat. That distinction matters more than it sounds, because there are weeks in June and July when temperatures climb and most leafy greens collapse. Lettuce bolts. Spinach turns bitter. But Swiss chard holds. It keeps producing through conditions that end the season for other greens. For a sunny balcony in the middle of summer, that kind of heat tolerance is everything. The leaves grow large. One cutting feels significant, not like a pinch of something decorative. A single pot managed through the summer can produce repeated heavy harvests from the same plant without replanting. The stems are edible too, which means very little of what grows in that container goes to waste. And the colors do something else entirely. Red stems, yellow stems, orange. A pot of Swiss chard in full growth looks like something from a display garden. It proves that productive and beautiful are not opposites. A small patio can feed people and still look remarkable at the same time. Number 8. Carrot. Carrots seem like a crop that belongs in the ground. Long roots, deep soil, space to develop. Most people assume containers cannot offer what carrots need. Containers offer more. In garden beds, carrot roots hit rocks, clay, and compacted soil. They fork, twist, and come out in shapes that belong in a comedy sketch. In a container filled with loose, deep potting mix, the roots have nothing in their way. They grow straight, even, and full. A medium container holds far more carrots than it appears. Plant them dense, thin them slightly as they develop, and dozens of roots can come from one pot by harvest time. Carrots also store well after pulling, which extends the value of one planting well beyond the day the container gets emptied. And in the kitchen, they go everywhere. Soups, roasting pans, salads, juices, snacks. A container of homegrown carrots is not a novelty. It is a practical food source that keeps proving its value long after harvest day. Number 7. Cucumber. This is where the list stops feeling like small space gardening and starts feeling like something else entirely. Cucumbers want to climb. Left on the ground, the vines sprawl and spread and demand space. But give them a trellis, a railing, a balcony fence, and something changes. The plant goes vertical. The same footprint that holds one pot suddenly supports a vine reaching upward, covered in fruit. That vertical behavior is what makes cucumbers extraordinary in containers. And they do not produce once and stop. Once a cucumber plant starts fruiting, consistent harvesting keeps it going. Pick the fruit regularly and the plant responds by making more. Weeks of production from one pot, climbing a railing that was doing nothing before. Fresh cucumbers hang clean and straight from a vertical vine. No ground contact. No rot developing underneath. The fruit stays healthier and the harvest stays consistent longer than most people expect from a single container. One pot. One trellis. A vertical food wall that produces all summer. Everything up to this point has been building towards something. Because number 6 is not just another productive crop. Number 6 is the one that makes people stop mid-harvest and look at their container differently forever. Number 6. Potato. For weeks, it looks like nothing is happening. A few stems push up through the soil. The container sits quietly on the patio. No dramatic growth. No clusters of fruit hanging from a vine. Nothing that signals what is actually happening beneath the surface. Because beneath the surface, something is building. Every time the stems grow taller, more soil gets added around them. The plant responds by extending downward, creating more growing points, more space for what comes next. This process repeats quietly through June, July, and into August. The container looks ordinary. It is not ordinary. Then harvest day arrives. The container gets tipped. The soil spills out, and potatoes pour out with it. Not one or two. Pile. A genuine, unexpected, almost disbelieving pile of food that grew entirely hidden from view while life continued above ground. That moment changes people. It is one thing to harvest lettuce leaves or pull a carrot. It is another thing entirely to watch food pour out of a container that looked empty for months. The potato harvest reveal is the single most dramatic moment in container gardening. And it happens from one pot, planted before June ends, on a balcony or patio that most people would walk past without a second look. Potatoes are also calorie-dense and store for months. That means this container does not just produce food for today. It produces food for weeks after the season ends. One pot, a hidden reserve, a harvest that arrives like a surprise. Number 5. Pepper. June planting does not hurt peppers. It helps them. By the time June arrives, the soil in containers is already holding warmth from weeks of sun. Pepper roots love that warmth. They establish faster, push growth harder, and begin producing earlier than plants started in cold spring soil ever could. One healthy pepper plant, given a pot it fits and sunlight it needs, can produce dozens of fruits across the season. Bell peppers, jalapenos, banana peppers, cayenne. Nearly every variety performs well in containers, and the harvest does not arrive all at once. Comes steadily over months as long as the fruit gets picked. That continuous production is what makes peppers so valuable in a small space system. They are also one of the most versatile crops on this list. Eaten fresh, roasted, frozen for later, dried, made into sauces. Every harvest from one pot can be used in a dozen different directions. And when fruit in red, yellow, and green hangs from a single plant, the container stops looking like a pot. It looks like something producing far beyond its size. Number 4. Eggplant. Eggplant is one of the most underestimated crops for containers. It loves heat. Containers in full sun deliver exactly that, warming the root zone faster and more consistently than garden beds. Compact varieties take to pots naturally, staying manageable in size while producing fruit that is anything but small. One eggplant from a home container is a full meal. That is not an exaggeration. The fruit is substantial, dense, satisfying in the way that greens and herbs simply cannot match. And a healthy plant produces repeatedly through the warm season, which means that one pot keeps delivering full meal harvests without asking for much in return. Eggplant is also expensive at the store. Specialty varieties even more so. Growing them at home in a container feels quietly extravagant, the way homegrown food sometimes does when the quality exceeds anything available nearby. And visually, a container eggplant commands attention. Glossy, deep purple fruit hanging from green stems against a patio background does not look like a backup garden. It looks like abundance. 3 crops in a row proving the same thing. Containers are not limited to small food. They are capable of producing serious, substantial harvests that change how a small space functions every single day. But the top 3 operate at a completely different level. And number 3 alone may produce more individual fruits than an entire raised bed sitting in a backyard somewhere. Number 3. Cherry tomato. 1 plant, 1 pot, 1 cage for support. That is all it takes to build what experienced container gardeners call a tower of fruit. Cherry tomatoes do not produce in waves the way large tomatoes do. They produce continuously. Clusters of fruit appear, get picked, and more clusters follow. That cycle runs from the first warm weeks of summer straight through to the first cold snap of fall. 1 plant, months of harvest, dozens of fruits becoming hundreds over the course of a season. June planting positions the plant perfectly for that entire window. By the time July heat peaks, the plant is already established and producing. By August, it is in full swing. September arrives and it is still going, still climbing, still covered in fruit while other gardens are winding down around it. The flavor difference is the detail that converts people permanently. Homegrown cherry tomatoes carry a sweetness and depth that store-bought versions rarely approach. The gap is immediate the first time someone tastes both in the same week. After that, buying tomatoes from a store starts feeling like an unnecessary compromise. A few pots of cherry tomatoes on a small patio can produce enough fruit to change the grocery list entirely for months. And they do it vertically, climbing upward, turning the air above the container into productive growing space. But the next entry does not produce dozens. It threatens to produce more than can be carried in one trip. Number 2. Zucchini. Zucchini has a reputation. Anyone who has grown it in a garden knows the reputation. Neighbors quietly stopping answering the door in August because another bag of zucchini is coming. In a container, that same energy lives in a smaller footprint. Compact bush varieties manage their size without managing their production. The plant stays within the boundaries of the pot while the fruit keeps arriving. And zucchini fruit does not hint at its presence. It announces itself. A container that showed flowers 2 days ago suddenly holds fruit the size of a forearm. That dramatic growth pace does something important for small space gardeners. It makes the effort feel real, visible, undeniable. There is no wondering whether the container is working when a zucchini appears overnight. One plant produces continuously through summer when harvested young and regularly. Let the fruit stay too long and it becomes enormous. Harvest it small and the plant keeps pushing out more. That choice belongs to the grower, and either way the pot keeps producing. One container of zucchini, planted in June, can fill a kitchen counter by August. Not a small harvest, not a decorative yield. A counter full of food from one pot. And yet number 1 still sits above all of it. Because number 1 does not produce one type of food from one container. Produces 2 completely different harvests. From the same soil, the same plant, the same June planting. Number 1. Sweet potato. For weeks, the vine spreads quietly. The leaves are green and full. The container looks healthy but unhurried. Nothing about what sits above the soil suggests what is building below it. But below the soil, the real story is already being written. Sweet potato vines grow with purpose. The plant is not decorating the patio. It is storing energy underground, building tubers that grow heavier and more numerous with every warm week that passes. June planting gives the full heat of summer to that process. July and August become the months when the underground harvest quietly reaches its peak. And above ground, the harvest is already happening. Sweet potato leaves are edible, nutritious, versatile, and available from the same plant that is simultaneously building roots below. A grower can harvest leaves for cooking throughout the summer while the tubers continue developing underneath. 2 completely separate foods. One pot, one planting. Then autumn arrives. The container gets emptied. And the same reveal that potatoes produced at number 6 happens again, but with a different weight behind it. Because this time the grower already knows what is coming. They harvested the leaves all summer. They watched the vine. They waited. And what pours out when the soil spills is the reward for all of it. Sweet potatoes store for months. They provide real calories. They cook in ways that greens never could. And they do all of this from a container that most people would have left empty because they assumed June was too late to start. It was never too late. That is what all 15 of these crops prove. Not just that containers can produce food, but that the right crops in the right pots, planted before June runs out, can generate harvests that run all summer, all autumn, and sometimes well beyond. A balcony with 10 productive containers is not a compromise. It is a system, a working, harvesting, feeding system built from ordinary pots and the decision to plant before the window closed. 1 container becomes 5. 5 becomes 10. And 10 containers planted with the right crops before June ends can change what it means to walk outside every morning. Not to check on decorations. To harvest. If this list opened the door to what containers can actually produce, the next video walks through it completely. Because there is a method to arranging these crops across a small space that multiplies the total yield from every single pot. A sequencing strategy that most container gardeners never discover, which means their pots produce a fraction of what they could. That video covers it in full, and one detail in it changes how every container on a balcony or patio gets used from that day forward. Do not miss it.